Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I'd like to thank you all, as Miss Jackson did, for coming out and braving the weather. I'd also like to thank our chair, Jeffrey Hoy, for giving me and the other candidates the opportunity to share our stories. As he has noted before, it is especially befitting that we are introducing our candidacies during Women's History and Sisterhood Month. As I've listened to the other ladies speak, it seems that we have some common messages and goals. Miss Chesley talked about moving about while you speak. As a teacher, I was a lateral entry teacher, so that meant I worked while I earned my certification to become an educator because I had previously worked in social work. So one of my mentors told me that one teacher on their feet is better than two in the seat. So I too like to move about and make that connection when I'm speaking with people. So standing stationary at a mic is a little bit foreign to me. Miss Jackson also mentioned moving forward, which happens to be part of my slogan also, because unfortunately there are those who want us to move backwards, and that is just not an option. For a few days, I fretted about what I could share with you that you possibly hadn't already heard during my bid in 2022 for the MC Senate District 33 seat. And as Super Tuesday came and went, I noticed comments on several social media platforms that said in various ways that people don't want to hear messages from candidates, and specifically the Democratic Party, that pander to their emotions. That people want to hear about facts, that they have been misled by the Democratic Party for quite some time, that they don't want to squander their votes on candidates who simply tug on their heartstrings, and that there's no room for feelings in politics. And it is there that I found my focus, because I absolutely believe, without question, that there is room for feelings in politics. Amen. So I ask that you please indulge me for a few minutes as I explain. A long, long time ago, in a land far, far away, the major metropolis of Albemarle, North Carolina, I was born Tangela Horn to teen parents who married young and divorced young. My first display of strength was to rename myself Lucy, after being Lucy from Charlie Brown for Halloween. At the age of 3, I was left in the care of my mother's parents. I grew up in a dilapidated single-wide mobile home on a dead-end dirt road in New London. To some, it may not have looked like much, but to me, it was paradise. Depending on the time of year, I could walk out the front door and pick any type of fresh fruit. My grandparents always had a garden, so there was always work to be done and fresh vegetables to be canned or frozen for the off season. My grandfather and uncles hunted the surrounding woods and fished Baden Lake, so the freezer on the front porch was always well stocked. Whatever they harvested, trapped, or caught was shared with the community, and the community members did likewise. My grandmother was one of the few women who had a driver's license, so every week she called around to see who needed to go into town for a doctor's appointment or to handle some business. And on Saturdays, who needed to join her on a 12-mile trip to the grocery store or just needed her to pick up a few things for them. To some, the saying that it takes a village is just a catchy phrase used by intelligent women such as Hillary Rodham Clinton in an attempt to garner a vote. But for me, it is a way of life That way of life was modeled by my family and my community. It is because they showed me how to love my neighbor that I consider myself to be a servant leader. I vividly remember distinct seasons. Waking up on Christmas mornings to a winter wonderland with icicles hanging from the pine trees and snow so deep that I couldn't ride my new 10-speed bicycle. The elders never checked air quality or UV ray indexes to decide if it was safe to go outside and play. We quenched our thirst with crisp, clear well water from the hose. As a school counselor in local high schools, there have been too many times to count that sporting practices and events have either been moved inside or canceled because conditions outdoors were unfavorable at best and hazardous to the students' health at worst. Here we are approaching spring without even a dusting of snow. Unfortunately, as an adult, I learned that it is believed that the waters of Baden Lake, in which we fished and swam, and the surrounding environment contaminated with toxins from Alcoa's aluminum smelting company that operated in the area for a century. Employees believed they were exposed to carcinogens that they inhaled and took home to their families on their clothing, thus contaminating their homes and endangering their families. Studies show that there is an intersection of environmental and social injustices because the majority of places with the poorest air quality and greatest nutritious food deserts are rural areas inhabited by the poor, indigenous, Black, and people of color. In September, Mary Jane Watkins, a resident of West Baden, whose grandmother was my second grade teacher, who is currently a student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, spoke at a rally organized by the concerned citizens of West Baden in conjunction with the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network. Fighting through tears, she expressed that although North Carolina has a long history of environmental racism, ecological violence, and exploitation in poor Black areas, the issue crosses racial, generational, and political lines. And together, with a collective spirit, we can fight back. In the words of environmentalist Leah Thomas, we cannot see the planet without uplifting the voices of its people, especially those that are most often unheard. I can restore the environment of my youth, but as a state legislator, I can uplift the voices of the people, especially those that are often gone unheard. And I will support legislation that decreases environmental decay and rights the wrongs that can't be changed. One of my most prized possessions has always been my library card. As a young girl, I would walk the wooded path to the bookmobile, parked at Cedar Grove AME Zion Baptist Church near Camp Barnhart, if any of you are familiar with the Boy Scouts. The driver would read me a story or two, and I'd fill my satchel with enough books to keep me enthralled until the next visit. My family was not one of means, but through books, my adventures and experiences were limitless. I am a product of the Stanley County Public School System, where I was blessed to have had educators who recognized my abilities and ensured that I could stand here with you today. I earned a scholarship to Wake Forest University, where I earned a bachelor's degree, and I hold a master's in education in school counseling from Liberty University. I am an almost 25-year veteran of the Rowan Salisbury school system, where I've been both a classroom teacher and a school counselor. I know firsthand that our students are facing struggles unlike any we have ever seen that extend well beyond a test. Our young people practice active shooter drills. They have survived a pandemic, lost loved ones to addictions and violence, experienced poverty and homelessness. We must have mental health services in our schools. Increasing the presence of school resource officers, cracking down and acting stricter discipline and punishment will not resolve the issues with which our students struggle. Mary McLeod Bethune said, "We have a powerful potential in our youth, and we must have the courage to change old ideas and practices so that we may direct their power towards good ends." I know personally that education is the great equalizer. The deliberate, calculated decimation of public education by the North Carolina General Assembly must be stopped. As a state legislator, I will support increasing the pay of educators and supporting staff, reinstating due process and insurance benefits upon retirement, halting the funneling of millions of dollars to the voucher program, placing mental health workers in every school, and undoing countless other malignant pieces of legislation that cripple our public school system and, as a direct extension, our communities. I recall being a young girl and my grandmother sharing that she'd had a stillborn baby. At the time, I did not comprehend what she was sharing, but there was no mistaking the sadness in her eyes and the pain in her voice. My grandmother had no choice. There were no medical options available to lessen her trauma. In 1964, she gave birth to her 10th child. And 1 year later, she was granted the right to birth control that would spare her body and her mental health. Thanks to the efforts of Margaret Sanger, founder of the birth control movement and lifelong advocate of women's reproductive rights, who stated, "No woman can call herself free, does not control her own body." As a state legislator, I will support legislation that protects women's reproductive rights unconditionally. Recently, I posted a meme on social media that a teacher who had been selected as Teacher of the Year was unable to attend the ceremony because she was busy waiting tables. Although that may seem absurd, it is reality for my colleagues and myself included. It is absurd that a person who works more than 40 hours a week is not earning a living wage. In 1938, Frances Perkins, the Secretary of Labor under Franklin Roosevelt, and the first woman member of a presidential cabinet, pushed the Fair Labor Standards Act, creating the first national minimum wage regardless of gender. Sadly, the current national minimum wage has not been raised since 2009. It's even more absurd that in 2016, the North Carolina General Assembly introduced legislation that outlawed municipalities from individually raising their minimum wage. People are sick and tired of working to attempt to survive. North Carolinians are entitled to wages that allow them and their families to thrive. As a state legislator, I will support legislation that raises the minimum wage to a livable wage. And there's one more issue I'd like to mention that weighs heavily on my heart. And as my teenager says, gets me in my feels. And that is gun legislation. According to North Carolina Health News, North Carolina saw a 120.8% increase in firearm related deaths among youth from 2019 to 2021. From 2011 to 2020, 525 youth in North Carolina, aged 17 or younger, died from firearm injuries. 121 of those alone occurred in 2021. In 2023, Senate Bill 41 repealed the requirement to have a permit to purchase a pistol. It's spring break, and I've been helping my daughter deep clean her room, or the tumble tower, as I refer to it. She doesn't bring home many textbooks, just mainly the iPad that students are issued. But when I picked up her backpack, it was extremely heavy. So I asked her, "What is all of this? What are you carrying around?" And she said, "Mom, it's a lot of stuff, you know, for protection, just in case." So I think it goes without saying that I would fight for sensible gun rights, regulation. No child should have to think that I need to put extra things in my backpack in case I have to use it for protection. So, yes, we must absolutely elect legislators who care for people. We must absolutely elect legislators who love their neighbors, who care about our planet, feel it necessary to adequately fund our schools so that our communities and its citizens can thrive. We must absolutely elect legislators who are emotionally invested in making our communities havens of peace, safety, and good health. We must absolutely elect legislators who will put community over personal gain and enact legislation that will promote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. So, in closing, there are two other things that I must mention. One, in honor of Women's History Month, I recently watched an interview with New York's Attorney General Letitia James. The host was commenting on how it must feel, or how interesting it must be, that the most crushing blows to Donald J. Trump and the NRA were dealt by a woman, Attorney General Letitia James, to which she proudly and confidently responded that she'd always heard, if you wanted something done right, let a woman do it. The second and final thing is due to the mentorship by our chair, Mr. Hoy. We women can do it, but we need your financial assistance. So please donate to our campaigns. Thank you.